Carmela. Good
Neil.
morning.
Hi. Morning.
Good to see you. As a starting point today then, can you just give us an introduction to yourself and what you do?
Yep. So I'm Carmela, as you said. I am currently working at a company called Apexx, which is a payments orchestration layer. I joined them back in January as their SVP Finance, which is their number one CFO role. My first role as a number one CFO. So it's been quite a 6-7 month journey. And that's where I am at the moment. I've had about, I want to say 10 to 15 year career in finance, which has been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. Never kind of fell into finance. It wasn't something that I dreamt of growing up, but here I am. And yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Brilliant. And talking to our audience who may be looking at moving into that first CFO position, what have you learned so far, and what advice would you give?
My biggest advice is look at the balance sheet. And I think that's most people in this like first role position would do that. You look at the balance sheet, make sure it's clean, make sure you've captured anything that needs fixing and tidying, particularly in that first 6 months. Because effectively, after that point in time, it becomes your problem. So I'd say that's one of the key things. The second piece is find out what drives the business. Who is driving the business? And is that correct in terms of where they want to get to in the next 3 to 5 years? And what changes you want to map out to change the way that the finance function interacts with the business. You might find you don't want to change things, but especially if you're joining a high scale up company, you need to understand how we're going to get to where everyone wants to get to in the next few years. So think about, from a finance perspective, how you're going to help shape the business and go along with them on that journey.
I was going to ask you from a people perspective as well. Obviously, you talked about that journey and where the department's going, but have you had any reflection so far on your sort of people management and how that's sort of developed for you since becoming a CFO and ultimately having that overall responsibility?
I think a lot of my previous roles, I have very much focused on the people aspect. I think it's really underrated how much of a soft skill set you need to have in a finance role. And I think it's becoming more of a common theme over the last, say, 5 years. But definitely when I joined in a finance role, the softer skills were left to the marketeers, the sales teams, the HR teams, and finance was definitely the hard, analytical finance skills. So over the last, I'd say 10 years, I've definitely tried to, as a finance kind of employee, really shape like those relationships, communication with people, and really understand what makes different departments tick and really understand what each department needs from a finance function. So going into this role, I've definitely taken loads of those learnings and have really applied them from day one. And when I say apply them, it's really just getting to know everyone in the business, getting to know everyone's objectives, priorities, what they want to do, how they interact with each other, where, departments work well together, where they potentially don't, and not in terms of personalities, but in terms of, do the processes work? Do the functions actually talk to each other properly? And that's, like I say, my history and how I've kind of shaped my roles in the past has really helped with that. So I'd say anyone kind of on this journey, like going up their career, I'd say definitely focus on those softer skills, those relationships, because they will carry you through any role. It doesn't have to be the number one finance role, any role that will carry you through.
Right. Where'd you get your motivation from?
Oh, motivation. My family have always been super hard workers. My dad ran restaurants when I was growing up. My mum did various different things. And I've always had, that motivation to work hard. And be successful individually, not relying on other people to kind of make you successful. So I think that's kind of built into me, like from a very, very young age. But really, a lot of my motivation is having 2 children. And I think that motivation has changed since I had them. I've always been driven and always kind of wanted to progress. But actually now I have a purpose. You know, I'm showing motivation at work and progressing and learning new things to set an example to them. And it's not to say that they will want to go into finance eventually. They might want to do something else, but it's really just helping show like the characteristics you need to have to kind of be motivated and successful in whatever it is that you want to do.
It's interesting. So would you say that then having children has made you more motivated as a human being in general? It's been a big sort of turning point for you in your life.
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely. And I think also it's kind of, whereas previously when very early in my career, my first role was in a grad program. I just didn't really know what I was doing in finance. I was just there, kind of trying to get through my qualification. And then I went on to the next role and the next role. I think then probably I didn't really care who I worked for. Like, it was a job. I wanted to progress. I wanted to get to the next role, the next promotion. Whereas now I actually care about the people I'm working with, like what the company kind of stands for, how they want to get to where they want to get to, and really having those people around you within a business to help you grow, not just in terms of promotion, etc., but learning, development, kind of on a more broader scale. And I think that has changed my motivation. I don't think I would just go and work for any company now. It has to be the right people, the right values that they hold.
How have you sort of managed to identify that? So when you were thinking about joining this company, what were some of the things you were thinking about? Is this the right CFO role for me? Because interview is obviously a two-way process. I'm really interested in how you judge that.
Yeah, I mean, I was interviewed by the CEO and the CCO, who's 2 of the 3 founders of the business. And I think the key thing that struck me was that they were willing to have me shape the role and willing to understand my advice. Like, quite, the interview was very much structured in the, what is it that you're going to do? Like, not in as, this is a checklist or she said the right answer, tick, tick, tick. It was, what are you going to do? Like, where's your experience? At a bigger company, what can you bring to us to help us? Like, this has been our journey over the point in time. This is where we want to get to. It was very much like they were inviting me into their kind of family. And I think that is such a good sign from very early on. And I felt very, very relaxed. And I think when you feel relaxed in an interview, you kind of know that environment is going to be very, very similar. It's not going to be without challenges, obviously, but I think that's kind of what won it over for me.
Yeah. A lot of people we speak to going into that role for the first time, there is a level of imposter syndrome. It's talked about quite a bit these days. Did you feel it much, and how did you cope with it?
Yeah, I'd say I have suffered with imposter syndrome since the start of my career. Like I said, I joined on a grad finance program. I didn't really know what I was doing. I never really dreamt of being in finance. I just managed to get the role and thought, okay, I'll do this. And as I progressed and moved companies, and I've been very fortunate to have been promoted quite quickly within roles and take on more responsibility. And because it's happened so quickly, I've very often kind of felt, someone is going to find me out very soon. This isn't what I wanted to do. Like, this is, I don't have the knowledge to be here. I hadn't dreamt of doing this since I was little. And I think I have really struggled with that throughout my career. I would say, though, I have felt that less in this role than leading up to this point. And I think the reason for that is the company that I've joined. They really appreciate my experience in big organizations, PE-owned, very, very fast-changing, fast-moving. And some of like the professionalization of the way that you present the financials, how you present those to the board, how you bring everyone along on the journey with you, I've kind of done that and moved that into this organization, and I feel far more appreciated in like this particular business. You know, being scale up, they just take your advice and you know, really appreciate that you can bring that to the table. And I would say that has done wonders for my imposter syndrome, because I have felt like I've added value. I feel like I have achieved things. I feel like I've brought the team along with me in terms of the finance team that I manage. And I think that has really, really helped. That's not to say that I don't think in, you know, 6 months' time it might come back again. But the one thing that I did do, which I would definitely recommend to anyone who suffers with imposter syndrome, is I got a business coach. And I think it was about 12 to 18 months ago, a former colleague that I worked with has one. He mentioned her to me. He said, I think you would really benefit from this. And I've done, I said, a session every couple of months with her. And one of the things that she really helped me with is understanding my strengths and what I bring to the table. So a lot of these like personality tests that you do within businesses, there's so many different ones, they kind of focus on your strengths and weaknesses and how your personality versus someone else's personality might clash. Whereas this, she brought kind of to light, what are my 5 key strengths? How do I play to those? Appreciating the fact that I'm not going to be strong in every single aspect of a role or a personality type. And I think her helping shape my brain in terms of going back to, if there's a really difficult situation or, you know, something, you know, an error has come up or, you know, you've got to fix something, I always kind of think in the back of my mind, what are those strengths? Okay, let's go back to those. I know I can do these things. Who do I need to help me with on the things that I'm not as good at? And I think that has definitely done wonders for kind of helping deal with imposter syndrome.
Have you learned that from, I guess, from building a team as well? And we talk about diversity a lot. We talk about cognitive diversity a lot. That you've really sort of started to understand, I'm this person, this is what I'm good at, so I need to ensure that I've got these people around me. Is that something you've kind of consciously maybe done in your role now or in previous roles as a result of that coaching?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, obviously, when you join an organisation, you have a team there ready. Sometimes you're fortunate enough to have a full team, sometimes you're not. And I've definitely been in roles where I've had, you know, 25% of a team that I'm just kind of trying to get through the motions. But definitely kind of building those teams when you do have that opportunity to, you know, fill vacancies or expand the team, it's definitely something I'm much more conscious of now, is making sure that I'm balancing the skill set between the teams. And I think probably when I first started, you know, managing teams, I want to say like 10 years ago, I fell into that trap of recruiting people who I got along with. On a personal level, which is all good. You absolutely have to get along with your team and you can't have like massive conflicts between them. But actually, I didn't look deep enough at, okay, I get along with them, but are they too similar to me? And therefore, I've got too many people of the same type in the team. And that's definitely over the last couple of years, I've reflected on that. And I think it's something really key to understand is, what is this person going to bring to you and how are they going to support the team and how balanced is that team?
What's the most difficult question you've had so far from a board member or an investor?
Oh, do you know what? What is the most difficult one? I think probably my first board meeting. I'd say the most difficult question they asked is, what surprised you since you've joined? And it's not really a difficult question, but it's a question that you have to articulate the answer to very, very carefully, because you want to give an honest answer to the board, because you don't want to be going back on something you've said 6 months' time. But you've obviously got your new kind of EMT, CEO, etc., that effectively you're working for and you're helping bring through. And your journey and your thoughts in terms of what needs to be done from a finance perspective. So I think, although it's not difficult in terms of the content of the question, it's definitely difficult to balance everyone's kind of expectations of what you answer, especially in your first board meeting when no one really knows your personality, where you're coming from, your context, etc. And I don't think I was prepared for that question, but I'm glad it came up. And I did balance, the answer very well. But I think that's something that everyone in a new number one role should expect from shareholders, board members, etc. Tell me something that surprised you and give them an honest answer.
Have you, over the years, it sounds like you've had some coaching, which is great. Have you had some good mentors and people around you? And do you feel like you've been able to change and adapt? A lot of people say, oh, people don't really change. But have you been able to kind of adapt and develop yourself from some of the great mentors and things that you've had over the years?
Definitely. I think you can't progress anywhere if you don't have good mentors at all. If you go through thinking everything you do is absolutely 100% perfect and you don't need anyone to influence you, that's completely the wrong way of approaching things. I've had great mentors who I've looked up to in terms of how they approach situations, how they take the emotion out of contentious topics. And I think that's probably where I've managed to adapt my skill set more so. I'm Italian, we're fiery Italians, you've got to suppress the emotion every now and then. But I think that's where more I've kind of looked up to people to say, okay, this is a really difficult topic in a really important meeting. How do you tackle that without upsetting everyone in the room? Or how do you tackle that and not worry about upsetting someone in the room? Is that really fine balance? And I think, like I said, although you kind of take that probably one side of the emotion out of it, on the other side, by nature, I am a people pleaser and I would never want to upset someone. And I think that is probably one of the key pieces that I've learned from other people that have mentored me through the years is you can't please everyone. You just can't. And there's a way of articulating it so that you don't damage your relationship with someone in the business. But sometimes in finance, you do have those hard conversations, you do have those really hard decisions, and you won't always get that communication right. You've got to appreciate work isn't everyone's life. There's things going on in the background. And sometimes you can just say something that just goes wrong in that moment. And I think, again, it's learning from mentors of how they fix that situation as well. And those are the key things that I've learned kind of over the years from them.
Yeah. I spoke to a Dutch CFO, renowned for being slightly direct. And he'd actually said to me something like, it's actually not fair not to be clear with people. You owe them that conversation. And whilst it's hard, you have to be able to do it. And I've definitely taken that on board as well. People pleaser like you, Carmela. But it's really important, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'd say definitely with team management as well, you take that advice with your team. And again, years ago when I was first managing people, definitely didn't want to upset a team. I didn't want to give them that super direct feedback that was going to help them develop and grow. You kind of jump around the topic and you do that whole the shit sandwich. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
Banned from YouTube.
Yeah. You do that sandwich of this is something really good, this is something tiny bit negative, but I'm going to give you some really good stuff to think about as well. And actually the message is completely lost. You need to be really honest with people and say, in a kind way, you don't have to say it in a horrible way, but this situation that's happened here, this has happened because of X, Y, and Z. And going forward, this is how we fix it and how you then develop through your career in kind of taking a different approach. So I'd really, really agree with what you say. You have to help people by being honest with them.
I'd say it's one of our values at Stoics. Well, it is one of our values at Stoics around growth mindset. And it kind of feels from everything you're saying that that's been a key theme towards your success is adaptation, growth, change. Is there anything else you would say that's been key to you rising to become a CFO when lots of people, don't make that journey and that transition?
I'd say by nature, and one of my previous bosses always used to say this to me, and he said it very diplomatically. Used to say, Carmela, your inquisitive nature is like a key kind of strength of yours. What he means is I'm really nosy and I just like to ask questions. But I think it's true. Like, you have to understand, if someone's telling you a piece of information, you have to be able to validate it and say, you can tell me that curtain's green, but what makes up that green in that curtain? How was it made? Like, how did we get to that color? Who decided that color? Like, really, you have to interrogate the information. And it's not about not trusting the information. It's about piecing different other pieces of information together. And like within finance, you're like that gatekeeper of a lot of functions. And you have to understand, if, you know, someone being in tech, you know, you have implementations and integrations, and they go from a sales team to an ops team to then a customer service team to then reflected in the financials. And if someone's telling you one piece of information, you trust it, and the other person's telling you a different piece of information, and then somewhere in the middle there's a bit of reality, like that's the bit that you've got to extract to reflect from a financial perspective. So I'd say really kind of interrogating data and just, you know, really trying to understand how things flow together, understand the product of the business as well, I think is like super key. And I say that's probably got me to where I am, and probably quite quickly as well, because I'm very much asking those questions immediately. Like, I think even before I started this role, I said, I need a couple of sessions before I start, like just so I can get my head around the information I'm being given, the data, etc., so that the day one I start and I can make an impact. And I think that's like a really kind of key. And it's not a quality, it's a skill. And that's something for that people should try and kind of enhance as they go through their careers.
You've been working fintech, technology-driven businesses for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
How do you see now, obviously, we can't get away from AI and technology influencing all facets of life and it becoming more and more so. How do you see it affecting CFO role and your finance function in the future?
I think people are very scared of AI, and it's not going to replace jobs, I don't think. It might be certain aspects of jobs that it replaces, but I see it more as it enhances the roles, the functions. It helps people work a bit smarter. It helps take away from the grind of like looking at data, you know, copy and pasting formulas, making sure a formula doesn't match. I think it can take that element of a role away and help an analytical role step back and look at the information rather than being buried knee deep in numbers and Excel spreadsheets. And I think that's where it will help finance functions probably in the next 2 to 3 years. Where it goes after that, I don't think anyone really knows. I think there's so many theories about how everyone will have their own personal virtual assistant who you can then delegate a meeting to, and then they can go on your behalf. I don't know. Will it get there? Maybe. But I think people just can't be scared of it. You've got to embrace it. Like you say, change is the only given, and you can't be scared of change. You just go with it, you know, see where it gets you. I think it's very early to say where we'll get to with it in the next 10 years, but I think my perception is it will help a finance function, not hinder it, not take jobs away. Yeah.
I think finance is one of those functions that often is a slightly later adopter in some ways as well, because you know that the data and the information it has to be robust.
Yes.
And at the moment, it feels like there's a lot of elements to AI which are a little bit risky to implement.
Yeah.
Particularly in kind of some of those really critical functions in a business. But like we all say, it will get there by the sounds of it.
Yeah. And you know, ChatGPT is great when you're tired and you just can't think of the sentence to write. And I write it and I go, that looks terrible. And I just put it into ChatGPT. Can you just write this better for me? And out it spits this most beautifully eloquent sentence. And I think those things just really help just like enhance things a little bit. But you can't, like you say, I think I know some people that have linked like their AI to their emails, and it just generates all the emails, and then it just becomes just this impersonal approach of, did that person really send that email? And they've not, fact checked it. You still got to try and create your personality in with it, but yeah, I think it can be really good, not just for finance, but for all business, for sure. Yeah.
We've all here got young children.
Mm-hmm.
It's the summer holidays as well. School was out this week for you.
Yeah.
For us last week. How do you balance being a CFO and being a single mother as well?
It's a hard balance some days, but other days it's a breeze. I think the key thing is knowing that you are not going to be good at everything every single day. Like one day you can be like the best mum, and you can be doing really well at your job, but I've not drunk enough water and I've not done my steps. Like, it's all balance related. And you know that some days your children are just going to need more of your time and energy, and other days your work is going to need more time and energy. And I think the way that I kind of try and balance it as best as I can without curveballs being thrown in, because there always is when you're a parent and there always is when you're a CFO, is just being organised as humanly possible. Waking up early before the girls wake up, because sometimes they wake up and there's a spider in their room that you've got to deal with, and then that like takes 20 minutes of your morning kind of getting ready time. But I think really being organised and also just setting expectations in wherever you work. I've never kind of hidden the fact that I've been a single mum for the past 5 years. I've been very open with that. I'm very open with what my commitments are, but also flexible where I can be. So it's a real balance of just making sure people are aware of your situation. And if there's like a hard boundary of I need to go and do this with my daughters, I've got to take them to the doctor, it's really important, just really being clear. Don't hide it. Don't try and tiptoe around it. It is what it is. And I think you get much more credibility and understanding if you approach things in those ways. I think on the flip side, where work is, very, very intense at times, and you've got a board meeting, that's just something that you cannot miss. It's a board meeting. Making sure you have contingency plans around you for your children. I think that's the key thing. I think my first board meeting, my mum lives in Italy. I was like, you've got to fly over and you've got to help me and like be there just in case like a disaster happens. And I was like overly kind of prepared for those situations. And I just say one of the key things is, as any parent, whether you're a single parent, whether you're a mum, you're a dad, you're always going to get the parent guilt, like always. And that doesn't matter if you're working full-time, you're a stay-at-home mum or dad, you're working part-time, you will always get the mum guilt. And as they go to school, you have to remember so many different things. There's so many channels of communication. There's a WhatsApp group for this. There's like a parent mail for this. And you are going to forget something. Like, you will. And that's regardless of if you're the most organised person on the planet or you're not. You will forget something. So don't let that guilt consume you, because if you let that consume you and you're working and you're trying to perform to your best, you won't perform at anything. That's my advice.
Do you, in amongst all of that, because obviously it sounds like you're incredibly busy, do you find it hard just to get time for you? And also, is there anything that you do to cope with all of the stress of kids and work? How would you sort of help other people manage all of that? Because it sounds like a lot.
Yeah, so on the rare occasions where I get time to myself, I think the key thing for me has been having something to focus my attention on. When my daughters are not at home, although I'm like, okay, I've just got a couple of hours or a day to myself, it feels so empty, and I feel like I don't have a purpose. I'm like, oh, normally I'm doing something for them, or I'm getting us ready to go somewhere. So I think really just making sure, like, when you do have free time, you use that time wisely. And have never been one of those people that then just sit down and watch the telly and relax. Like, all the time my mum says, are you going to relax today? I'm like, no, I'm off doing this. But for me personally, and it's not for everyone, I just make sure I've got something to do. And whether that's I go to the gym and see my personal trainer and like give him a debrief on, you know, what's going on in life, or whether it's I see my friends. I've got a great network of friends. And I think that's kind of helped me in the whole juggle as well. Or, you know, I moved house a couple of years ago, and literally every spare minute I was decorating, renovating, doing something, walking around with a drill, like trying to find, you know, things to put up. I think it's just really making sure that whatever it is that helps your brain kind of function and evolve, you're putting your energy there. But that's not to say that that's the right answer for everyone, because some people just need to sleep. I don't. So yeah, that's kind of how I spend my free time.
I think depending on what you read, at the moment, only 10 or 15% of CFOs are female.
Mm-hmm.
What can we be doing to ensure there are more female CFOs in the future?
It's a really tough question, because I think a lot of it is like inherited kind of traditional roles within families. And I do think there are females who do want to put their careers on hold and don't want to progress into those kind of like next steps until their children are grown up, etc. So I do think like you can't ignore that. Like that is the dynamics of where we are like as a society. But having said that, I think it is important for women to see that they can progress into those roles. And it is definitely seeing a shift, definitely in the last 10 years. You see much more senior women, not just in finance positions, but in other positions. And I think the key thing that's like a theme where you do see women in those senior finance positions is that the culture of the other people in, you know, senior EMTs, ELTs, whatever you want to call them, embrace what a woman brings to the table. And that's not to say that a woman's knowledge is better than a man's. It's, again, going back to those softer skills, there's a balance of how women and men approach things. There's a balance on how people approach things as well. But I think really women can give a much more pragmatic, balanced view, particularly in finance roles. And I think the only way to help women progress more and get that percentage up is to have more men really kind of attuned to what they can bring to the table. And I think the other thing that I would say is, personally, I've been very fortunate that I've never felt blockers. I've never felt like just because you're a woman, you can't be in this position. I've been really, really fortunate. But what I would say is that you do see like that ancillary perception, which isn't directly biased at women, but I've been in organisations where a man doing a very similar role to me works all hours and he's seen as a top performer. He doesn't have children. He doesn't have commitments. Whereas I was doing the same role or similar, and the perception was, oh, yeah, but you stop at this time. I'm like, yeah, but I log back on much later on, and actually I'm super efficient with my time. I'm actually performing at the same level and balancing all these different things. And the perception wasn't that I was a bad performer, but the perception was that this person was an excellent performer because they've got all those extra hours on their in their hands. And I think that's probably the shift in perception, that people need to think about how they're approaching what you say is a good performer or not, and kind of understanding what someone's achieving with everything else that they've got going on around them as well.
It must be a frustrating misconception when people are sort of presenteeism thing, where people are saying, well, if you're there, you must be working harder. But actually, like you say, all you really proved was that you were doing the same job in less time and more efficiently, which probably
Yes.
makes you a better performer.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'd definitely say that to be true. And like I say, although I've not felt that kind of bias in terms of progression at being a woman, I think a lot of that is also down to the companies that I have worked for. And I've definitely interviewed in the past for a role that's actually been interviewed by a woman. And the role required travel, which I've travelled a lot with work, and I've balanced it with children really, really well. But her one kind of big question to me was, how are you going to travel? And I thought, well, would you ask a man that question? Would you? Like, you wouldn't. And for me, at that point, I was like, I actually don't think, I wouldn't want to work for an organisation where that's a question. I'm looking for this role because, you know, I've qualified for the role, I can do the job. How I arrange my travel, as long as I'm doing what's required of me, that actually doesn't matter. And I think it kind of comes back to my earlier point around motivation and making sure part of your motivation is working for a company that's right for you and your values. But I'd say, I think we do have a long way. To get to 50%, you know, CFOs, I think it's going to take a long time, but I would say it's definitely progressed from where it was. There's definitely less of that, oh, she's a woman, so she won't be as good as a man. I don't see that so much anymore. It's more like the ancillary perception pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone so in a different direction. In recent times, we've been sat having conversations with client, CEO, board who said, yeah, we want to hire a new CFO and they need to be a woman.
And you don't want to be hired just because you're a woman.
No.
Like, you absolutely don't. I think in some scenarios, like some women say, I don't want to be known as the woman CFO. I want to be known as the CFO. And I think that's really valid. Yeah. Like when you're talking and you're in the board and you're being the CFO or whatever finance role you're in, you don't want to be seen as the woman one. But you can't ignore the fact that there are less women than men. And I think you're right. If I was hired to be the token woman, that would, you know, that's completely the wrong side of, you know, trying to balance this view out. It's about employing people with the right attitudes, the right qualifications, the right skills for what you need your business to be. And it shouldn't matter whether they're a man or a woman. But you can't discount women the way they've been discounted in the past. But at the same time, you can't just choose a woman over a man just because they're a woman. It's just not. It goes completely the wrong way.
Yeah. It's very hard because I get this sense that a lot of organizations are making what you might describe as a conscious choice to create balance, I guess. And in order to do that, given, as we've said, there are less female finance leaders than male finance leaders, they're always weighted towards perhaps men that may not have had children, may have had more advantages in their career, and so maybe further along and higher up the ladder for that. And so companies do have to think consciously about thinking about more about the personality, like you say, the attributes, rather than necessarily thinking just about the title or what have you. They have to give people opportunities in order to make those decisions. So they have to think consciously about it, but equally, like you say, no one wants to be the token selected female CFO.
That's a kick in the teeth.
That's kind of the thing about how do we get balance when there are less female CFOs. Yeah. Otherwise, everyone's just chasing the same small pool of CFOs. You know, you have to give people opportunity. So it's a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, it is. And I don't think anyone has the right answer at all. But, you know, personally, I'd say it's going in a better direction than where we were, for sure. You know, I've worked in tech organizations since I graduated. And when I joined a tech organization in finance, there were very, very little women, like at all. And now, you know, at Apexx, where I am now, the balance of women is pretty high in senior positions as well. And that's not token women. It's actually women who have, you know, a real professionalism, degree of qualifications, really bring something to the table, not as a woman, but in their roles independently.
What are you most proud of so far?
Most proud of, I think, getting through a lot of change in a very short amount of time. And I'd say in my previous business that I was at for 8 years, and it was super high growth, highly acquisitive, PE backed. You learn a lot in those scenarios, but you threw in COVID and everything just went kind of a little bit nuclear in terms of the business is very much dependent on tourism. So straight away we had to change things. Brexit happened, completely changed the business model. Working from home with my daughters at the time were 2 and 3, running around while I was trying to do conference calls, and there was a lot of change going on, and trying to remain professional. I think like getting through that 8 years, and it was a tough 8 years at some points in time for sure. But actually what I'm proud of is I've taken every single positive out of those 8 years I possibly can. And I've shaped that into, this next role. And just getting through COVID was a tough time. I'm pretty proud of that, balancing children. Like I say, there's some calls that I was on that they'd be climbing on the kitchen worktops, like putting their feet under the tap, and I'm trying to have like very, very sensible conversations with people, or crying in my ear because there were no dairy slices. I think just remaining composed and getting through that and still getting promoted within the businesses, I think personally it's a great achievement for me to do that. I think some people would have crumbled under that pressure, and that's not to say that I was wrong. I think I went through a period of, right, I'm getting through this, and no, I'm not going to fail at this at all. Like by hook or by crook, I'm going to get through this one way or the other. And I'm proud I did, and I'm proud I got to where I am now as well.
Do you feel like you've had to make many sacrifices to be promoted and get to where you have today, or it's kind of just happened?
I don't actually think I have. I think it's always happened very naturally for me. Have I at some points wanted to have got there quicker in some instances? And probably, but I don't feel like I sacrificed anything in doing so. I think any time I thought I should be there and I'm not there yet, I just took that as a learning opportunity to say, okay, well, what do I need to do to get there? I don't think yet I've sacrificed anything, but maybe in a couple of years I may say otherwise, but I've been quite fortunate. And I think, just going back to COVID again, we've been very, very lucky that as parents, it is more accepted that you actually do have a family. I think prior to that, people had children and they would kind of hide the fact that they had children. They would need to go, to a doctor's appointment, etc. They'd be taking half a day's annual leave, or they'd be working from home and have a call and like try and keep children quiet in the background. Whereas now, you're working from home, it's a video call, the girls come home from school, I'll be on a conference call, they'll come on, they'll wave, they'll say hi. I think probably pre-COVID, people would have had to sacrifice a lot more of that time with children. And I think only like that, normalizing children in the background during COVID was such a big thing that now actually people appreciate you have a family, you have a life, you have commitments. And if you're a good egg and you work hard, if you need to take time to do something, you can always be trusted that you make that time up and you'll deliver. So I think the sacrifice piece is becoming less and less. So personally for me, no, but maybe I've been very fortunate.
When you were looking for this role that you now have, was there this sort of thing for you of saying, I am ready now to be a CFO or an SVP, that's the role I want. I'm not now looking for that. And was that hard for you? Because I guess what happens in the job market is you get presented with lots of roles that are lateral moves because you're moving the organization. How did you sort of go about making the transition, I guess?
I think for me, where I was before, it was an SVP role in a big organization, reporting into the group CFO. I knew that I wasn't nowhere near ready for that kind of level of group CFO role. Like it was going to be years before I'd get there. So I always knew if I was going to move somewhere else, it was going to be a CFO for a small company, a scaled company where I knew that I could add value, something in a similar industry, again, where I knew, some of the jargon. I mean, I'm still not a techie after all these years, but where I could navigate like the language and just the KPIs and the way of reporting financials. So I think for me, it was always, I was going to move to be a number one role. I didn't want to do a sidestep. I didn't want to go back into another big organization at the same level, reporting into group CFO, because I wanted to get that experience of understanding the full end-to-end finance. I've worked in SMEs before as like number two, and you're kind of a little bit of a bridesmaid doing that position, because you kind of do all the work for someone else to present. And we went through like an exit as well. We got taken over. So that was great grounding for going back into a smaller company. And I did have an understanding of that end to end, but I didn't have that responsibility of that is all on you. And that is what I wanted. I was never going to get that staying in a bigger company. And even now, that group CFO role in a big company, that's just not for me. And maybe that then comes back to your question in terms of sacrifice. If you were going into that role, I think I'd be sacrificing more. And for me, I'm at that point where I've got a good balance. I've got a role that I really enjoy. I really enjoy being in that number one finance role and seeing that end-to-end kind of process, adding that value, seeing that journey, helping the business grow. And I have really, strong family time as well. I went on a tangent there, but yes, to answer your question, I think I kind of knew if I was going to move, what I wanted to move to. Yeah. And I think that's a key thing for anyone going into a number one finance role. Understand what it is you want from the role. Don't just go for the first thing that you're offered.
Yeah. And since you've started, your role's got bigger.
Yes.
Which we're seeing that more and more in startup scale-up world, where the CFO, and in other companies, but you end up with a CFO-plus role. Yeah. Tell us a bit about that and how you're coping with that.
Yes, I just recently kind of expanded my role into finance and operations. And I think the term operations is really interchangeable depending which business you're in. If you're in a big business, operations is your, in tech, how do you get something from being signed to live and all the nuts and bolts in between it? How do you service your customers, etc.? I think in smaller companies and scale-ups, it's often looking at the business operations. Like, how is one function flowing through into the other? Where have we got blockers? How do we unlock those things? Kind of putting a business plan or operating plan in place for the business as a whole, and having those KPIs to keep people accountable, having those KPIs also to say, this is bad, this is good, we're in bad, how do we get to good? It's really process-driven operations that I think ultimately does whatever happens in those areas lands in the finances lap anyway. You have to report on something that's happened, a blocker that's happened within the business that actually it's nothing to do with finance. So it kind of is quite natural, I think, in definitely scale up startups, SMEs, to have that finance person be that lens and that gatekeeper trying to hold kind of everyone together. I just professionalize the business a little bit as well, and just in terms of their thinking, in terms of holding people accountable to use systems that are in place for a reason, put processes in place, people are adhering to them for a reason. And it's a difficult role because you're constantly in everyone's business.
You're nosy. I really like that.
I'm nosy, so it's great for me. So yeah, I think, like you say, it's quite a common theme now that finance leads are kind of taking this expanded role and approach. And I think it goes back to my earlier point around the finance skill set, needing those softer skill sets, because you can't, or you can, but I think to be successful in kind of expanding that role into the business operations side, you can't come at it with a hard finance, black and white, this is how it is. You've got to adapt with the business. You've got to understand that there's a blocker. Why is there a blocker? How do we realistically unlock this without, this is a process that you must say yes or no to? And it's just working with the business to do that.
Yeah. We get a huge amount of people we speak to who want to work in private equity or private equity-backed businesses, maybe having not done it before. And then we have over here private equity generally saying you must have private equity experience. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I've worked for 3 different private equity backed businesses. I think to have experience, it is that chicken and egg situation. I think the easiest way to get experience is to go into an SME that is just newly PE backed, because those PEs are generally less involved in the business, have slower runway to exit, are more appreciative of how the business runs, like what the strengths and weaknesses are. And it's probably easier to get a role in those businesses without having that experience previously, I would say, just from personal experience, that is. I think one thing to consider if you're going into a PE business is they want a return. Like, there is no two ways about it. They want a return. They've invested money. They want to see that money grow. And I think you have to appreciate that. And especially if you're thinking about a role within a PE business, understand what is their expectation, because that will drive the pace of the work that you're doing, the relentlessness of what you're doing. And often finance is the messenger to PE houses, and sometimes it's the message that they don't want to hear. And sometimes it's the real message, but you may have to change, the actual result to fit what they want. And I think as long as you go into that knowing that they want to get something out of their money, and you can keep up with that pace, then go for it. You learn so much. I learn a hell of a lot from working in PE-backed businesses and different PE businesses and how they work, and just the nature of what it is that they're trying to do and trying to scale. It's a great place to learn different aspects of finance, M&A, FP&A, down to cost efficiency, cost-cutting exercises. It's a brutal world sometimes, but you do learn actually some very, very enhanced business learnings, I would say, in a very concentrated space. And sometimes PE houses, they want their money, they make sensible decisions. Sometimes they don't make sensible decisions, and you learn from that as well. So I'd say, also having been in PE, I think that has helped me with scale up, because you can see if they ever want to get there, or to an exit, or to additional fundraising, what those people are going to be looking for. So you can start to shape the business and how it presents itself in advance, before you get to a point where you're in it and suddenly it's, okay, right, we've got to do this now. At least if you can kind of take the business along the journey to set their expectations, that is a different story.
Seems to me that the main difference is that even in a PLC, clearly people want growth, they're looking to drive value, but the timescale is clearly much, much shorter in PE. So you have to be high energy, inquisitive, some of the traits that you've kind of talked about today. I think growth mindset, adapting to change, that will actually stand you in good stead for that sort of environment. But do you think, I guess, on that people should always be looking for people with previous PE experience? Because we hear that a lot, I want someone that's been through a PE cycle and an exit. Or do you think that's less important? And again, it's more about those attributes, the right type of individual to take that business forward?
It's definitely the type of individual. I think in some PE houses, depending on the maturity of them and their portfolio, I think sometimes you do need to have that experience. You kind of need to know what you're getting yourself into. But a lot of it, I think it is just picking out those attributes of someone who is not going to be scared of change, who is not going to do a forecast and then a week later they say, no, that we're completely changing that, start again. You've got to go through that relentless kind of cycle and be tough enough to get through it, and know that actually it's not going to change. It is what it is. You've got to get through that. You can't sit there and say, I don't like this, the way this is being run. It is what it is. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of you've got to have that drive, that inquisitiveness. You've got to be tough. Mm-hmm. But it's not all bad. Yeah.
Are there any sort of closing pieces of advice or tips you would have for aspiring CFOs that we haven't covered so far?
I'd say learn the art of storytelling, I think, is a key thing. You can have all the data, all the accuracy, all the calculations, all the spreadsheets in the world, but unless you can tell the story of what that means, you'll lose a room. So I'm very much of the opinion of you keep it simple, have the detail behind it. And I'm very much understanding of the message that I'm conveying and the detail to back it up, so that if you're asked questions, you have that in the back of your mind. But, tell that story and know your audience, because one story that you'll tell someone on the same topic will be slightly different twist that you'll tell someone else. And I think that's a key thing, especially when you're looking at, board presentations, shareholder presentations, just in your EMT and helping, implement new processes that might get a bit of pushback, is like learn that art of storytelling, keep things simple. But what I would say with the whole keep things simple is a balance. Don't keep things simple for the sake of it. If something needs fixing, do it right. Don't take the easy way out. And I think that's what a lot of people do when, they find a problem on the balance sheet. Oh, we'll just leave that till later. Don't do that. It'll come back to bite you. So I'd say that keeping things simple on the communication aspect is a key thing, but know your detail at the same time.
Brilliant. Carmela, thank you. I think you're an inspiration to a lot of people. You've got a great positive energy and really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.